Bill, thank you for all you're doing for our club. And why don't you get us started with our speaker?
Thanks, Cannon. Good afternoon to everybody. Your program committee has been hard at work trying to bring you relevant themes and timely issues to discuss here at our Rotary Forum. A great thanks to those on the committee members who have brought forth their ideas and their contacts to help make this hour time well spent, as Alex Frazier used to say, President Alex Frazier used to say. We seem to be averaging about 150 to 250 members each week, which is a reasonable crowd. However, we'd really like to make sure we're reaching all the members. So let me echo what Gina was telling us, because one of our virtual realizations is we have a bunch of outdated contact information in our Rotary database. And some of our members may not have even made it to the no lunch jump online with us. So anything you can do to help Gina with that high priority item to get everybody reconnected to the programs on Monday, we'd sure appreciate it. Cannon and I also get a lot of questions about, hey, when are we going to go back to Loudermilk? And if you've heard the stories, heard the programs about Dr. Gupta and by Dr. Lewin, the best we can say is it's a moving target. We'd certainly like to get back to Loudermilk sooner, as soon as it's safe, of course, and we'll keep you up to date. We will be doing these virtual programs for the foreseeable future. So I would encourage you, again, to go subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is where your all your information, all the information will be loaded. And of course, we'd love to get your feedback. Please don't be shy. This is not a shy audience. So if you've got programs you'd like to see or programs you don't want to see, please let us know. And again, for the speaker today, look at the bottom of your YouTube channel, and we'll have there's a link to ask Q&A, and we'll feed those questions to our speaker. Our speaker today, David Nour, is to me one of the great American success stories in process. David immigrated to the suburbs of Atlanta from Iran as a teenager with $100 in his pocket and little knowledge of English, and he was moving to live with an aunt and uncle he'd never met. So after high school, he obtained his undergraduate degree at Georgia State and his MBA at Emory's Goizueta Business School. So we've got a real product of Atlanta here speaking with us today. David has become an international thought leader in relationship dynamics and organizational change. And he's worked with companies like Disney, Siemens, HP, my old employer, Deloitte, just among others. He's also authored 10 books, including 2 bestsellers, Co-Create and Relationship Economics. His newest book coming out this fall is entitled Curve Benders, which you'll hear a bit about today. So David's work centers around relationships as currency, and relationships is the greatest off-balance sheet asset for any organization. Whether you're large or small, public or private, relationships can be better structured and leveraged to help grow your business faster. David is a lifelong Eagle Scout, is passionate about youth, and supports the World Scout Jamboree, Junior Achievement, One Voice, and High Tech Ministries. David, we're delighted to have you here today.
Bill,
there you are.
It is good to be with you.
So, any surprises on the Mentimeter results? I know you use Mentimeter regularly in your work.
No, from what's topical on top of folks' mind at the moment between school and elections, those are certainly, obviously important topics. Optimizing current processes and looking for new innovations, fresh ideas. Those are all great topics that, as Cannon mentioned, we're going to dive into in our session today.
Well, terrific. I'll disappear and circle back with some questions from the audience toward the end.
Sounds great.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. So good to be with you. As Bill was kind enough to mention, I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so sharing with you some insights from our global research on this idea of relationships more than just transactional and how they are fundamental. They are really critical in your ability to think and lead very differently. On a completely personal note, I was actually recently looking at my passport and a couple of things dawned on me. Number one, I'm almost out of pages. Number two, this thing is expiring pretty soon. I want you to think about your portfolio of relationships as your passport to innovation, to really thinking and leading beyond not just what we understand what we're doing today, but how we need to really think about the evolution of ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. So I hope you can see my slides. I'm going to go ahead and take you through a handful of ideas. In terms of today's agenda, obviously, I want to touch on our economic crater, kind of where we are today. I want to really focus on what we believe are three enablers of recovery and the work I'm doing with global clients and focus on some of these. And then I want to really give you and spend bulk of our time together on this idea of strategic relationships, an opportunity for co-creation as really a unique value creation opportunity within our enterprises. And then, as Bill mentioned, my 11th book is called Curve Benders. I want to give you a glimpse into that research that we've done over the last several years. So very quickly, again, you've seen the numbers. Several industries, unfortunately, are getting decimated. So from leisure, hospitality, unfortunately, education, health services, professional services. What this represents is a massive labor shift that is going to have to take place in our economy in the next year or two. So if you think of the busboys or the parking attendants or all the hotel staff that are just no longer needed because of the lack of, again, business in those industries, where do these folks go? And how do we upskill, reskill, or redeploy this talent to really make sure that they're not left behind? And like any economic crater or any crater, there's always hope. There's always these spring opportunities to really see the silver lining. And if you look at both the recent McKinsey as well as the IMF projections, there's on one side a very optimistic and a fairly quick recovery. On the other, into 2021. On the other side is a much more pessimistic and unfortunately, concerns with either mutation of this pandemic or just an elongated period where we're going to continue to not just socially distant, but physically distant ourselves as well. So if you think about it, any business model that's predicated by physical proximity is going to continue to struggle. Bill knows I was on the road 208 days last year. Well, this year, I think I've traveled maybe 20, and it's been since February since I've been on a plane. So again, what happens to that excess capacity? What happens to us not physically getting together? I'm going to show you some examples of that in a second. I'm a big student of Peter Drucker's, and I particularly appreciated this quote. And what I really want you to focus on is few things as useless, if not dangerous, as the right answer to the wrong questions. I think in our need to come up with answers and solutions and explanations where we tend to judge, really rush into those, I don't think we're spending enough time in inquiry and really trying to understand not just what's happening, but why. And I've always believed a really strong economy tends to hide a lot of organizational flaws and leadership shortcomings. And one of the things that this global pandemic has done is forced us to really focus on one of our biggest assets, which is our portfolio of relationships. And that's where, in working with global clients, what we found and what we've been thinking a lot about is what are the key enablers of recovery? And there's several economic recovery shapes, from the immediate V shape, which is a fairly fast rebound, to a U shape, to a W or a prolonged L or even V. My fear is actually a K-shaped, where the knowledge workers, like many on this session, where we all have access to internet and we can use Zoom sessions and we can certainly get a lot of our work done. What about the bus boys or the hotel workers or that heavy immigrant population that may not have access? And as you think about those who are going back to school, if I can't afford, and I'm working two jobs, I'm a single mom, I'm working two jobs to make ends meet, how can I afford a laptop or high-speed internet access for my kids to be able to do distance learning effectively? So we believe there are three things that most leaders, most organizations need to fundamentally focus on. Number one is sector variance. As you can imagine and appreciate, certain industry sectors are actually doing really well. I've got several clients that are in technology infrastructure. I've got a client that's the second largest wine producer in the US, and their business is booming. I've got another client that's in, again, manufacturing, believe it or not, and they're doing really well. So there's certain sectors and even companies within certain sectors that are doing really well. Who are they? Where are they? And are those some ones that you should focus on? So earlier this year, I started working with Delta Airlines and other, hotels, Marriott and Hilton and Intercontinental have been past clients. And if that sector is getting, really crushed, how can we pivot? How can we recalibrate? How can we refocus while they figure out how to pivot their capabilities? How do we work with other industry sectors that are growing? Because we've got to get demand back. If we don't get demand back, the rest of it, unfortunately, I don't think is going to matter. Getting that demand back is heavily also going to depend on what I call labor flex. Your ability to take your existing talent labor pool, and as I said earlier, reskill, upskill, redeploy that labor. Let's say you hired a bright young man or young woman to kind of lead your events. Well, guess what? We're not having conferences, we're not having meetings, we're not having events. But I like that person. So although we hired him or her for a role that is no longer needed, can we recalibrate? Can we refocus them to support our marketing, to support our sales, to support other parts of our organization? The more you can really flex your talent pool and your labor, the easier it's going to be for you to do the third one, which is really a pivot on your capabilities. Now, we talk about this as a sandbox engine, and I'll explain that in a second. But as I said earlier, if your value creation is based on physical proximity, I believe we're still going to be 12 to 18 months away from wanting to physically get together. I was on a call with the vice chair of the Global Vaccine Alliance. This is about a $10 billion nonprofit. Their world is to deploy vaccines. And her estimation is we're still 12 to 18 months away. So if masks and physical distancing is going to be an ongoing thing that we're all going to have to do, how do you pivot your capabilities to really deliver new products, new services, new ways of value creation? I'll show you some examples of that in a second. So one way to think about this is my daughters played soccer for a number of years. My son plays lacrosse. If you think of any of these dynamic games, or if you're a fan of them, most people would agree that 90% of these games are played when you don't have the ball, you don't have the puck. And the best teams are always thinking, where should I be? What should I be doing? How do I put myself in the best possible position to really support my team when we do get the ball or the puck? Well, this is really the dynamic market we're all living in. Most of my clients are not really thinking beyond about 90 days because that's how dynamic it's become. And it's very difficult to do any kind of long-term strategic planning where we don't know what's going to happen next week or next month. Now, do we have some good ideas? Sure. But again, there's so much uncertainty that makes this real-time ability to move and maneuver that much more critical. The Board of Innovation recently put out a paper about this new low-touch economy, right? So how do we adapt to delivering great experiences for our target audience when we can't physically see them or touch them or be near them? So again, creating and pivoting your capabilities to virtual becomes more critical than ever. If you think about ever since mankind has created value and has made money, it's been primarily through two sources. One is labor arbitrage. How do we get others to kind of deliver that value on our behalf? The other one is turning intellectual property into intellectual capital. How do we turn great ideas into great results, great outcomes? And the other key part in that is really the upside. So if you look at the gray line, as that's the status quo growth, if you're really interested in the red, which is how do we really take advantage of that upside potential, I would submit, and there's a lot of research on this that says there are critical roles. There's certain roles in the organization, not individuals, but roles in the organization that are directly and definitively value creators. So who are those roles? Where are those roles? How do we identify those? And respectful to most organizations, these are in the crop of vice presidents at the top, right? It's that person that's running that product that we've neglected, or that region that is absolutely growing, or that piece of our business that we haven't paid a lot of attention to that has enormous potential. This is the opportunity to identify who those value creators are and really make sure the value enablers are in place to really help them do what they do exceptionally well. If you look at this chart alone, the success of this heavily depends on your relationships, and your relationships both within the organization as well as external to it. So we still unfortunately see a lot of confusing vision and direction, a culture that inhibits innovation, resistance to change, misaligned initiatives. Audiences can't understand where Mahogany Row is going. Much more importantly, they're not clear on their why. Why are we doing this? Not just what we're doing. So we work with a lot of clients in this topic we call strategy visualization. Fundamentally, there's a ton of neuroscience research that shows our brains actually process visuals 60,000 times faster than we do text. So I get a lot of 50 and 60 page PowerPoint decks from executives on their strategy. I think I'm pretty intelligent, often have to call them back by about the fifth or sixth slide and say, listen, I don't understand where we're going, how we're going to get there, or what's my role in this whole thing. So we're big believers of, and I'll show you the value of this, of really visual storytelling and being able to succinctly articulate in this fashion, here's our current state, here's our future state, here's what a pilot or prototype of that new approach looks like, and here's how we're going to launch and really roll out that new initiative. If you think about the common thread in innovation, if you think about common thread in exploring new opportunities and new net growth and new revenue opportunities, the fundamental glue are the relationships you choose to invest in to really accelerate your ability to get there. So when Hilton wants to attract more millennials, instead of walking in and saying how great we are, what if we really came along them and their journey through freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, both on campus and on property, to help understand how they could be better off because of Hilton. Or when Hilton wants to recruit 10,000 veterans and really take them through a transition period to really welcome them into the Hilton family, here's the way we've showed them how to do it visually. When Intercontinental wants to show a new franchisee what has to happen for a new hotel opening process, we could show them a 36 tab spreadsheet, or we could show them a visual representation of that journey. Similarly, when KPMG wanted to show its global audiences of chief compliance, chief risk officers, the global risk footprint, what better way to do that than a canvas? We did this for Tupperware in how they cultivated confidence in women, including an Apple store-like environment called the Studio, where you could go in and experience their products and services. This is for a company called Oceaneering, where they brought global best practices in their project management communities across multiple industries to really help those relationships learn and grow through each other. This is for Cox and their ability to attract and retain exceptional talent. And all of these examples are taking a ton of information that candidly people are not reading to really help them understand how to visually internalize and apply some of those ideas. One of the more popular examples you may have recently read about or seen is Dyson. If you know about Sir James Dyson, I would submit this company's core competency is engineering. In many ways, it's reverse engineering, right? So how do we take an existing product, reverse engineer it to really improve key facets of what they do and how they do it? So there's really any surprise to anybody in this call that within 10 days, Tyson was able to take their existing reverse engineering capabilities and competencies, really leverage some relationships in the medical field, flip the switch on their manufacturing, and begin to take orders for these elegantly designed and very capable ventilators, right? This is a company that, and Ford had done something similar, but 10 days. So one of the challenges that we keep running into is for mature companies and mature industries, it's very difficult for them to innovate. And I would submit that although innovation and disruption is sexy to talk about and interesting to think about, it really is a stair step of iteration, which is how do we do the same thing better? If you build a culture that is proactively iterating and relationships who like, trust, respect each other to continue to challenge the status quo and iterate frequently enough, you'll stumble onto innovation, which is how do we do new things? You innovate enough, that's the opportunity to stumble on disruption, which is doing new things that makes the old obsolete. And there's the real opportunity to really begin to think and lead very differently in your organizations. When we're faced with a challenge or an opportunity, we often think about what should we do and how should we do it? We don't ask enough who questions. And I would submit to you that if you begin to ask more who questions, Who do we know? Who do we need? How do we strategically connect the dots? So if I wanted to reach John Finnegan, the former CEO of Chubb Insurance, I know, like many of you, Raymond King, who knows Karen Williams, who's on John's board. So in a very bizarre manner, the Kevin Bacon 6 degree of separation really does work, except in business, it's typically 3 degrees away. So this is an example of a relationship mapping tool that we use in basically identifying any challenge or opportunity we're trying to reach. Who do we need? Who do we know? And how do we collectively connect the dots to reach those really strategic relationships? And as Bill was kind enough to mention, in one of my early books, Relationship Economics, I created this kind of systematic discipline approach that we help large enterprises to really understand and internalize in how to address some of the things that they're trying to do. And the easiest way to think about it is on the left-hand side, there's this mapping, there's an engine in the middle that allows you to be more intentional about the relationships you choose to invest in. And the right-hand side, never used, but it's all about how do we capitalize on these relationships to think and lead very differently. So in Curve Benders, the next book, I've had 6 grad students doing social science research for me, and we've identified 15 forces that we believe will create headwind, tailwind, or turbulence in the future of not just how we work, but as we've all experienced through this pandemic, how we live, how we play, and how we give. So for sake of time, I want to share with you 3. One is grit. Grit, a woman named Angela Duckworth, Harvard professor, came up with her seminal work around this, and I love her definition of the power of passion and perseverance. So this is Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe was a 1912 Olympian from Oklahoma. He was a Native American. And as you can see in one of the most famous pictures taken of him, it looks like he's wearing 2 different colored socks. Well, it turns out that the morning of his race, his running shoes were stolen. And he found 2 pair of running shoes in the garbage. Unfortunately, they were different sizes. So he had to wear an extra layer of socks to make the left one fit. That day, Jim Thorpe won 2 gold Olympic medals. So how often are we allowing tools to become crutches and really block our ability to get to our desired end results, desired outcomes? I believe at this intersection of future of work and strategic relationships and nonlinear growth, grit is going to become critical to ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. Visualization, I already showed you some examples of. When you put visualization and storytelling together, you really light up our brains. Visual storytelling, I believe, is a new leadership competency, and leaders who can articulate not just where we're going, but how we're going to get there in a compelling and engaging manner are going to have a competitive advantage over those who can't when it comes to talent, when it comes to not just attracting that talent, but really retaining and developing that talent. The other thing that in curve benders that I'm talking about is this personal S-curve. So many of you know an S-curve is an organization or an opportunity for you to rethink, reimagine, reinvent yourself, your team, your organization, where you invest early on, you finally really hit your stride, you scale it, and then at some point you reach a plateau. Well, if you continue to build these S-curves together, then you really have a great opportunity to constantly reinvent yourself, if you will. And I believe certain points in our personal S-curves, I call it a refraction point, where we need individuals who can dramatically accelerate our ability to get things done. I call those relationships curve benders. So beyond what we can accomplish, our research shows that they actually shape who we become. So magical question, who are these curve benders? Where are they? How do we find them? Much more importantly, how do you become a curve bender in the lives of others? And that's a lot of what our research shows and what I share in the book. We've also researched a great deal about technology over the next couple of decades in what I call the present. Obviously, that's today. What is probable in the next decade and what is possible in the next 2 decades in areas like digital and nano, green, bio, and neuro. And as you can imagine, appreciate, every facet of technology and science is going to have a profound, dramatic impact in the way we work, the way we live, the way we play, and the way we give. So the last part of that I mentioned about your ability to really come out of this economic crater looking stronger than ever is really what we call the sandbox engine. And if you look on the screen, on the left-hand side is the core business. The core business is build a perfect execution box. And in my experience, it's very difficult for mature companies and mature industries to really innovate. So the left-hand side is really well suited for that iteration example that I gave earlier. We work with typically the CEO, sometimes the chief strategy officer, to do that strategy visualization that I showed you, as well as a series of innovation sprints at the bottom of the page to really dip their toe in the water of really thinking and leading very differently. And I'll work with them in really creating a chief entrepreneur role and a sandbox engine, that's the right-hand side of your screen, that is all about inquiry and exploration and experimentation and really pursuing net new growth opportunities that would be perceived very high risk to the core business. Just to give you a data point, I work with a client about 15 billion in revenue. We brought in a 32-year-old woman from Amazon as their chief entrepreneur. And if you think of 3 ways to create value, you can either build it. It often takes way too long. You can partner for it. You may not have as much control, or you can buy it. There's a whole bunch of risks involved in that. But we, in essence, she outsourced the development of a new platform in 6 weeks and about a little over $1 million. We acquired a 3-person company in Windsor, UK. So all in about 6 months, about 5 million. Year 1, that business did about 11 million in business in revenue. Year 2, about 32. Year 3, 84. Spoke to them about a week ago. They'll do over 100 million in revenue on the right-hand side of the screen. That is, again, a fraction of the 15 billion that its core business is doing. But this wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't carved out away from the core and really the courage, the commitment, and the infrastructure to go explore net new growth opportunities. So I want to leave you with this. Is, again, one of my favorite quotes, that the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read or write, but it will fundamentally be with those who are either incapable of or unwilling to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I would submit one of your biggest enablers of that growth opportunity is your portfolio of relationships. So, Bill, let me pause. Questions, comments, insults?
I'm sure they're all out there somewhere. So let me ask you a question. The thought leader business tends to be a new idea every other minute business. And yet the company CEO's job tends to favor steady as she goes. It's one of the reasons why big companies have a harder time innovating. Sure. And there are lots of different ways to break that logjam, if you will. So where are you getting pushback on your innovation sprint or the sandbox engine, the new concepts around, visualization is a terrific idea because everybody under 40 has been visualizing, on the computer since they were born.
Sure.
And so that's really one of those things that's coming. But where are you getting pushback?
Sure. So the pushback is, unfortunately, a lot of large enterprises have thought of innovation as a peanut butter spread across as many different areas as they can. They've created innovation initiatives and they've done all kinds of things. Bill, most of them that I know really don't have much to show for it. And it's because they're trying to run a business in 2020 with a 1950s business model. So as I said, let the core, and this is the way we work with clients. I actually convinced that, we work together with the CEO and the board. Number one, we created, I don't know if you saw in that image, actually an innovation committee on the board whose job is to really be the stewards of net new growth opportunities. And we really work with the CEO on, listen, let the core business do what the core business does. God bless them. Not only they keep the lights on, but they pay everybody's salaries and they afford us the opportunity to go with their steadfast leadership to really separate. The example that I gave, the client has a corporate headquarters where a couple thousand people come into every day. I convinced the CEO of let's not put that 32-year-old woman from Amazon at corporate. We put her in a conference room in Midtown, right? Let's get her away from the corporate structure, corporate governance, and all the things that again, the core business is run by, to really explore. And Bill, we don't do enough exploration. So the biggest pushback is, trying to put metrics on innovation. How we're going to measure this? How is going to drive sales? And my point blank response is it isn't. But you know what? We're going to go bet on, like a VC does, 10 ideas, knowing that 8 will fail. And by the way, they don't fail, they become learning moments. But the 2 that really succeed are going to be transformational in the evolution of our business. You need it. Most organizations need a separate engine, we believe, where you can do just that. Bring in you don't need a battalion, but you need a SEAL Team 6 that's willing to go explore net new growth opportunities.
So one of my most dire moments in the consulting business was I was in a utility company, and we brought this new concept forward with the CEO's encouragement. It said, at this utility company, we're going to go with fire, fire, aim, as opposed to ready, 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 aim, fire.
Maybe.
And so you'd have thought they were about to lynch me, tar and feather me when I presented the concept. So my question to you is, some industries are more ready than others to come out of COVID. So which ones do you think are really going to resonate with a relationship kind of conversation, and who's really going to come out first?
No question. And I'm actually seeing 2 ends of the spectrum. On one end, Bill, no question, the clients we're working with right now, and we're working on 8 of these innovation sprint projects. They're unequivocally companies that are doing really well. Again, it's a lot easier to invest if you got a strong balance sheet and you have a propensity to say, you know what, let's go ahead and really think about the evolution of our business at the moment. So there are, again, technology infrastructure. There are certain health services that are very relevant, or products. There are tech tools, platforms, ecosystems that are really enablers of all effectively working from home. I'm working with a global pharmaceutical company that realizes that this is their moment to do really well. So one end are companies and really sectors that are doing really well. Believe it or not, at the other end are, as I said earlier, when there's a really strong economy and the tide is high, you don't realize who is naked in the water, right? So when the tide comes in, that's when you really get exposed of, listen, maybe our processes or the things we're doing aren't as effective or impactful as we thought they were, because everything was going great. So we're actually working on a couple of projects with people that realize what made us successful and there's two time frames to think about: BC, before COVID, or AC, after COVID. And what they're realizing is what made us successful before COVID may or may not be what gets us to the evolution of our business in the after COVID world. You and I talked about this. The more executives I speak with, the less think of this as a beginning, middle, and an end. And believe it or not, more see it as something we're just going to have to live with, and something that we better prepare for the next pandemic or the next black swan event that comes and dramatically impacts our economic, our social, our societal norms.
So one of the questions from the audience is, in Midtown, there's a real trend towards innovation centers,
sure, particularly
in Tech Square, for instance. There's a series of innovation centers. Have you worked with any of them? Is that the right answer? Is that going to work?
I haven't. Unfortunately, I've been to several of them, and as a testament, one of the big health insurance companies created one, and I think unfortunately they subsequently shut it down. Bill, that's one of those, respectful to anybody that may be leading one, I believe that's one of those peanut butter spreading strategies of, it's a trendy thing. I actually wrote a Forbes leadership article on the top 10 reasons most of them will fail. Number one, you've got a 30-year veteran leading it who, as you said, doesn't really have the propensity to really think and lead differently. Number two, you're trying to apply your traditional business model to something that absolutely should be engine for inquiry. Number three, you've got internal talent, internal mindset, internal thinking. We're big fans of, I don't know of a business that doesn't need fresh thinking and fresh perspective. So the ones that we're working on, we're often bringing in talent from the unlikeliest places because they don't bring the baggage. They don't say, we tried that 30 years ago and it didn't work.
Well, thanks. Well, we really appreciate you being here, David, and presenting your new material to us as well as your old material. And it's always a lot to consider with all the concepts and how it applies to each of our businesses. That's the real trick behind all the ideas. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And Cannon?
Great. David, thank you. Again, I'll echo Bill. Just thank you for your thoughts there. Such an incredibly timely topic. Maybe just two questions as we wrap up. We're coming up to the top of the hour. You mentioned kind of the chief entrepreneur concept. For a larger business, that's one thing. For a smaller business, it might be harder to have that one post. But how do you measure, and you alluded to it, but I'm just curious, how do you measure the performance of someone like that, where it may take 18 or 24 months before you even see if they're getting traction, and you don't want to wait that long. So, how do you measure that performance?
Gannon, great question. We've actually identified a scorecard, and they include things like net new explorations, net new things that we really looked at. And again, you need to think about that sandbox engine as just that, as an opportunity to go explore, as an opportunity to look for net new growth opportunities. So one of the biggest things I guide senior executives and CEOs to kind of get away from is measuring exploration with your traditional kind of battle-tested, proven business model. This one, you want to go look for new opportunities, look for really white spaces, look for where can we identify almost like entrepreneurship. So how do we bring that entrepreneurial mindset within the construct of a large enterprise? So that the metrics are very different, but I've always believed if you do the right things, the numbers will come. So are they looking at enough opportunities? Are they exploring enough? Believe it or not, one of our metrics, are they failing enough? And are they failing fast enough to learn? I'd rather fail in a week than a month. I'd rather fail in a month than a year. So are they failing fast enough and learning and applying those learnings to the very next opportunity? So those are just some of the metrics that we're holding the right-hand side accountable for their progress, not perfection.
Well, thank you. And great points. One final question then, and this one maybe asks you to put your visionary hat on a little bit, but we're managing in chaos in some respects in this environment, right? Managing through chaos the best we can. Yet some businesses are starting to put some things in place that probably will stick.
Sure.
So in your view, 5 years from now, what are those one or two things you think will stick that are coming out of this crisis? And what do you think there will be done less of once things settle down?
Yeah, let me just give you and your audience three things. There's a recent McKinsey report that said an estimated 46% of the U.S. workforce will not physically need to come back to an office. So this idea of working from home is, I don't believe it's going to go away, predominantly because most executives I've spoken with are realizing enormous gains in productivity because there's no commute, because there's no more, lack of a water cooler. And that's got its own set of challenges. But working from home I don't believe is a fad. It's going to continue to become more of a prevailing construct within large organizations, number one. Number two, as such, empowering them to be efficient, to be effective. Cannon, one of the first things I did is I upgraded my digital infrastructure. And my kids jokingly call this the NASA command center because I've got 3 monitors and camera and lights. And right, I think this is going to become more of the norm of we've got to upgrade our digital footprints, our digital presence to be. And it's not just the tools, it's also the online digital whiteboards. And some of that technology right now is really kludgy. I believe they're going to become that much stronger in immersing others in an experience that we haven't had before. The third one is I am really energized. I'm really excited about net new growth opportunities. If you think about some of our most recognizable innovations, they came amidst the last recession or the last really difficult time our country went through an economic downturn. So I think when there's a case for investing in prudent investments in some net new growth opportunities, I think you're going to come up with some really interesting business models. A lot of people think of innovation as products or services. We actually focus on business model innovation that I think is going to emerge from this global pandemic.
Well, David, thank you for those thoughts. You remind us that there's a discipline to innovation, and it doesn't happen by accident. And your points about just the power of the network, a strategic network, whether it's sales or broad relationships or vendors or whatnot, fits into that. And fascinating perspective. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And
Thanks,
Bill,
David.
thank you for guiding a great discussion.
Delighted.